Hey Skillshare babes, welcome to my series of Photoshop classes on Skillshare. My name is Meg Lewis. You probably know enough about me from the bio that you saw on Skillshare. Let's just dive right in. Our first lesson here is on resolution. And I'm going to go a little bit over and beyond on all of the conversations and sections taught throughout this class and throughout the entire series. The way this series works is each of the classes are independent of one another, and you are welcome to take the classes that you think apply best to you, but you will get the best experience if you take all of the classes in their sequential order. So we might be learning things along the way, and if you just hop into a random class at the end of the series, you might miss some important things. And we're going to dive pretty deep into all of the things along the way, so it's really important that you just, kind of take them all, and each class is about, an hour or so worth of videos, so it's not really going to take up a lot of your time, but we will be covering a lot of information. Okay, so let's dive right into resolution. So let's talk about what exactly resolution is and what you need to know here. Okay, so let's take a look at Photoshop here. I mentioned this before. I am using Photoshop CS6 right now. Sometimes I use this one, sometimes I use the Creative Cloud. So what you need to know is that the Creative Cloud is a monthly or annual subscription-based service that Adobe offers. If you downloaded the trial, you probably have a Creative Cloud trial. The CX6 is actually the newest version of Photoshop if you buy it separately, and I want to use both just so that I show you guys the difference between the two, because they're basically the same, but they are two different things. They have all the same tools. It's just that Creative Cloud is a subscription service that updates on its own, whereas CS6 is the discs that you actually buy separately in a store. So I'm using CS6 for right now, but I might switch back and forth between Creative Cloud just so that you guys see the difference. And again, they're pretty much the same. I would highly recommend just getting a Creative Cloud membership if you don't mind spending the money. It's cheaper because it's just a fee every month, a smaller fee. And the nice thing about that Creative Cloud is that it updates every time there's an update to the software, so you don't need to spend hundreds of dollars each time a new Creative Suite comes out. It will just update automatically for you, which is really, really nice because they do release new ones quite often, every couple of years, and each time there are new features. So rather than spending all that money each time, you can just get that Creative Cloud membership and it will update on its own. All right, enough of me blabbering, so let's get right in. This is Photoshop again, CS6, as you see right here. So let's just create a new Photoshop document here. So I'm going to go File, New. And you see that we get this handy little window that pops up. You'll probably have different numbers right here. This is just saved what I did last time I was in Photoshop. So if you have different presets there, it's absolutely fine. We're going to customize this for ourselves. So up here you have your file name. So we can name this whatever we want. Let's name it whatever we want. Again, I don't put spaces in there just because it's good file naming conventions, and I will dive more on that in a different lesson. Okay, so again, this lesson is about resolution, and you really need to know what resolution is before you even create your first Photoshop document. So right now I have it set to a pixel width of 1200 and a pixel height of 1200, and obviously that is going to be a square, but we need to figure out first what all of these things are. So we have pixels and inches, which are the primary things that I use and that most people use in their day-to-day life. I'm going to explain to you a little bit about the difference between pixels and inches. So pixels are anything that you need to design for the web. That includes mobile devices as well, will be in pixels. So that's anything basically for the web or for the screen. So anything you're looking at on a computer screen and you won't be printing out for any reason, you'll just want to use pixels. And if you want to print something that your primary focus for that is to be printed, you'll definitely want to go with inches. For this class, we'll be doing a lot of things in pixels only because this is an internet-based class, so we'll be looking at everything we're doing on screen. So I'm going to use pixels for everything. And I am primarily a web designer in my job, so I usually use pixels most often, but if you are a print designer or a photographer or somebody who really needs to print their stuff out a lot, you'll probably use inches more often. So inches again, if I click inches here, you'll notice that it says width of 16. It kind of tries to convert those 1200 pixels into an inch that's closest. So we have 16.667 inches is the same in Photoshop as 1200 pixels. Let's go back to inches. So if I wanted to create 8.5 by 11 piece of paper document, I would literally go 8.5 width and then 11 height and make sure that these are set on inches. So again, with printing, there are two color modes. There's RGB color mode and CMYK color mode, and we'll go more in that, dive deeper into that in our color lesson. But for now, I just want you to be familiar with this entire creating a new document panel here. So if we were creating a document for the web, we would want CMYK. If we created a document for the web, we'd want RGB, not CMYK. CMYK color is for printing. So again, if we're doing inches, we always want to have it set on CMYK because we're printing. And if we're designing for screens and for the internet, we'll want to put it on pixels and RGB color. Now these other colors, you really don't need to know much about. Grayscale obviously just keeps things in gray if you need that for any reason. I usually just mess with the grayscale settings in my printer, which is the only time I usually print grayscale is if I'm going with a printer, and I can just do that during printing settings. So really just RGB and CMYK is all you really will ever need to know. As for resolution, resolution is generally only important to know if you're designing for screens and for the web. So anything you're designing for screens in those pixel format, in the RGB color, you'll need to know a little bit about resolution. Now, resolution is how large your document is and how many pixels wide and how many pixels tall it is. So there are some common resolutions that we use here in web design and also with designing for various devices. If I were designing for an iPhone, for instance, there are common resolutions. So if I was designing for the web, there are a few standard dimensions that you need to know. Back in the day, websites used to always be 960 pixels wide. I'm going to type this in here, 960 pixels wide. That is a very, very common width for websites, and it is kind of not very wide at all, but it's a safe width for websites that can be viewed on any size of laptop or desktop computer, which is why 960 is a good number. Now, for websites, you can make websites as tall as you want. We have a general rule where if you want to keep things above the fold on a website, which means that it is above the point of where you have to scroll down. So if I opened up a website, it's all the things I see right from the beginning before I'm scrolling down is above the fold. So if I want to keep things above the fold, I would make my document 600 pixels high. So 600 pixels in height is how much we have to fit in above that scrolling point, above the fold. So, okay. Now we have a website that's 960 pixels wide by 600 tall. If I create that document, you're going to see this is 100% of the size, and it's pretty small. This is just a really great size of a website if you have a very, very tiny laptop. So if you have one of those really small 11 inchers or maybe smaller laptops, this size will be viewable for those people. But then think about if I was using a 27-inch desktop computer. This would be really very small. So I highly encourage that you always make your websites taller than 600 pixels. That 600 pixel height is just safe for what's above the fold. And people obviously love scrolling these days, and keeping things above the fold isn't as important as it used to be back in the day. But again, I'm just teaching you about resolution. So 600 pixels tall for resolution is okay, but you can absolutely make them taller. I don't think I've ever made a website that's only 600 pixels tall. But 960 pixels wide is very common again. And another dimension in width that is also popular for creating websites, let's create a new document, is 1020 pixels wide. That just goes along with the standard dimensions of your screen. So 1020 is a nice ratio to fit within your screen. So again, common resolutions for websites are 960 pixels wide and 1020 pixels wide, 1020 pixels wide. Okay, so let's move on to a different kind of device, which is the iPhone. Today, as I'm recording these tutorials, the iPhone 5S is the most recent iPhone, and there are specific dimensions for that, and it's 640 pixels wide. I'm going to type this in here, 640 by 1136 pixels tall. Now you'll see when I press OK, and I zoom in to where this says 100% down here. I'm going to zoom on in. I'll teach you guys how to zoom later, and I'm going to teach you how to do all of these things. You'll see this is 100% in size, and it's huge. It's so much bigger than your iPhone is. So I'm sure you're wondering why it's so large, and it's definitely a challenge when you're designing on this size when your phone is so small, because you have to figure out what the size of text is that would be best. And the reason why it's so big is because your iPhone 5S is Retina screen, which means that it has a lot of pixels packed in there. So you really need to design it really big so that it can look nice and crisp when it's so small on that Retina screen. And again, if we wanted to create a new document and we were designing for an iPad, common resolution size for that is really big. It's 1536 pixels wide by 2048 pixels in height. And that is obviously very large. Let's go to 100% again. Look how big it is. It's going off of my Photoshop canvas. It's just huge. So resolution is something very important to know. And if you have to look up resolution in the future because you aren't sure what the size of it is, Android, for instance, has a lot of different devices which all have different resolution sizes, which is that's exactly why I'm not telling you what they all are now. There are so many. But if you ever need to look up a resolution size on your own, just go right into Google and search for, you can do Android resolution sizes, or if you have a specific Nokia device name, you can search for the resolution size of that. It's all quite easy, but at least you know what resolution is, and as we move forward, you'll be very comfortable dealing with different resolutions. Hello, everybody. Okay, let's talk about opening up Photoshop for the first time and taking a look under the hood and seeing what's going on inside. Alright, so let's go to File, New again, open up this new Photoshop document box here. Let's name it whatever we want again. And again, you don't have to name this whatever we want. Really, just name it whatever you want. Okay, so let's create a document that's, let's go back to pixels since we're designing for the screen. And let's just do 800 pixels by 800 pixels. So that's going to be a square. Something I haven't covered yet is this resolution here. And so resolution is just how many pixels per inch you want to show, and that's a little bit complicated, and the only thing you really need to know, and the only thing that I have to do for my day-to-day life, is that 72 here is just what you need to put for if you're designing for the screen. So if you have pixels and RGB selected, also make sure that it says 72. Now if you're designing for print, you want this to be a little bit of a higher resolution, and you want it to be 300. So again, if I were doing inches and CMYK, I would also want this to say 300. If you find that you'll be designing for the web or for the screen the most, like me, just make sure that's always on pixels, it always says 72, and it's always set on RGB. Okay, so again, 800 by 800, resolution of 72, color mode, RGB. Now this 8-bit here, that's all you need to know. You'll never need to use anything besides 8-bit. I don't ever use anything besides 8-bit, so you'll be fine. So just keep this at 8-bit. The nice thing to know about Photoshop is that there's so much going on inside of the program that you won't use most of the things in your day-to-day life, and chances are you just won't even know what half of them are. There are so many things that I don't use, but I do use a lot of Photoshop, and there are so many things that the average person doesn't use, and teaching you all of those would take months, and we only have just a few hours here on Skillshare, so I'm going to go through the most important things. But as you see, Photoshop has a lot of things that are always under the hood of everything else, and it's up to you to kind of explore what I don't teach you and figure out what they mean, because we don't have time to go over every tiny little detail. Okay, so again, background contents just means you can choose what color you want your background to be from the get-go. I always start with white, and then I move from there and just select colors after I already have my document created. Okay, so let's just press OK because we're done here. Alright, so here is my Photoshop canvas, and it looks like there's a white background here, And if you want to, if you like math and numbers and you just like to know the size of things at all times, I would highly encourage you go to Command R, and that is the shortcut for showing those rulers. Do you see when I'm clicking Command R again, they go away, and then Command R, and they're back. Okay, so I like to see them all the time, but it's up to you. The default setting does not have them showing. Something else right from the get-go that I really want you to know that's a shortcut is pressing F. If you'll notice, whenever you press F, it filters through these 3 different views that Photoshop has. This one is a full screen view, which is really nice for looking around and being able to see everything at once. Clicking F again goes to this black view, which removes all of the clutter around Photoshop just so that you can concentrate right on your canvas. It's really great if you want to step back and look at what you've put on there. And then F again goes back to this tiny little window view that you can move around. So say I had a internet browser beside it, I could kind of compare and click back and forth. Normally I like to do this beautiful full screen view here. But again, that is clicking F, the F key, F for Frank, and clicking it again and again and pressing it again will go through those different views. Another way to go through those views is down here, this little button on the very far bottom left. You can click it and it will go, between those views. There we go. Okay, so this lesson is really about, I just want to kind of give you guys a little lowdown on what all of these things are and what they do, because there's a lot going on and it can be pretty intimidating. Okay, so there are a lot of terminology with Photoshop. A lot of it is kind of intuitive, what you would call these things anyway. Some of them are kind of weird, quirky Photoshop sayings. Okay, so over here on the right hand side, and this view that you see of my Photoshop should be the default view. I reset my Photoshop back to the default settings, but if you're seeing something that doesn't look like yours, just know that you will, if you keep watching these tutorial videos in this series, I will show you how to customize your own Photoshop. But again, this should look how yours does. I hope. Okay, so again, on the right-hand side, we have these large panels here. These are called windows. And if you go up here to window, you can see all of the optional windows that Photoshop has, and we'll go into this more later. But these are just called windows, and you can customize the way they look and which windows you see at all times. So that's what you're seeing over here, these large boxes. We will, again, go more into this in detail later. Up here, you just have the detail toolbar for whatever tool you have selected. And the tools that you have are over here on your left-hand side. Okay, so these are tools, and you can see there are quite a few. And each of the tools have this little arrow by them, and when you click and hold, you can see all of the tools that are inside of that tool. So again, Photoshop just has so many things that it does, and I will touch on these tools as well in a bit in another video, but these I just want you to know are tools. Okay, and then whenever you have a tool selected, you can see that there are tool options for that specific tool up on the top. This bar here is the options. So when I select a different tool, you can see those options always change depending on what tool I have selected. So again, lots of stuff to know here, lots of stuff to do in Photoshop. Okay, so we have our rulers, which I showed you already with the Command R shortcut for showing and hiding your rulers. So we have our top ruler here, and then if I move this toolbar out of the way, you can see our left-hand side toolbar over here. Okay, and that's about it for what you're looking at right when you open up Photoshop. And again, I will repeat again, we will be going into the detail of how all of these things work in future screencasts. All right, guys, see you on the next one. All right, let's talk about the toolbar. The toolbar is such an important part of Photoshop that you hear a lot about, and I'm going to demystify it for you. Okay, so as you remember from the last lesson, the toolbar is over here on the left, and it's pretty long and skinny. There are a few things that the toolbar does that you might want to know about. If you don't like it being long and skinny, you can always double-click right in between that X and those arrows, or you can just click the arrows, and it will change between two views that the toolbar has. It has long and skinny and then short and fat. So you might like it one way. I like it long and skinny. That is also the default view, I believe. So it's really up to you. You can use it either way you'd like. Okay, so I'm going to go briefly through some of the more important tools, and then I'll set you on your way to the next lesson. All right. Okay, so our first tool is just the selection tool, and you will use this for just about everything. It allows you to grab things, move them around on your canvas, and again, you'll just use this all the time. This will be your most often used tool, and again, it's called the selection tool, and you will use it all the time. The shortcut for this tool, which I will not tell you all this very frequently, I'm not going to tell you shortcuts all the time and for all the tools, but the shortcut for this tool is V. And you are allowed to hover your mouse over a tool and leave it there. It'll tell you the name of the tool. This is actually called the Move tool. And the shortcut is also right there. Let's hover back over it. It says V. So that's the shortcut key for this. So say I was on this cropping tool and I wanted to go back to that selection Move tool. I would just press V. And that would take me back to that Move tool. Okay. So again, as you see, I have this image here. I'll show it for you, a picture of my lovely friends, Kevin and Yoko. So if I have the Move tool and I have this layer over here selected, I can move them around, which is quite nice. So that is the Move tool. Let's keep going. This down here is simply called the elliptical marquee tool. And again, like I showed you before, if I hold my mouse down on there, it will show me all of the other kinds of tools within that tool. So again, we have a rectangular marquee tool, a single row, and a single column marquee tool. So I use the rectangle one most often because I do squares and rectangles a little bit more than I do circles, but that doesn't matter. For this, we can do a circle. So if I have an image selected, for example, I could click and drag this marquee tool. I'll just let go here. And as you can see, I have this dotted marching ants kind of line going around my image. And since I have my image selected, if I wanted to, I could literally just press delete on my keyboard, and I've just completely removed that part from Kevin and Yoko. They're gone. Bye. I don't want to do that. I'm going to go back in time. I'll show you how to do that later. But that is what this marquee tool does. It makes selections, and then you can do things with that selection. So again, I could do Command C for copy and Command V for paste. And now I have Kevin's little head and another layer, and I could use the Move tool. I pressed V to go back to the Move tool, and I can move Kevin's face around, put him on Yoko if I wanted to. And that's how that works. Okay, again, I'm not going to go through all of the tools this in depth, but that is an important one to know. The next tool we have here is the lasso tool, and if I click and hold again, I can see more tools that are behind. So I have the lasso tool, the polygonal lasso tool, and then the magnetic lasso tool. These are fun. I love these tools. So they do exactly what that elliptical marquee tool did, but I can make my own shapes. So I could make my own marching ant selection. See there, I did that. And you have to click and hold down while you're drawing. So you're basically clicking and holding while you're drawing a shape. And then you always have to make sure that you end up where you started and let go, and it will connect that for you. If you don't end where you say I want to end here and I don't actually connect back to the beginning, I would just let go and it'll connect it for me, which is quite nice. Okay, so that's the lasso tool. The polygonal lasso tool, I make these little points. See, I'm clicking here, clicking here, clicking here, clicking here, and it's doing this for me. And then if I go back to the beginning, you'll see that little circle that popped up. There it goes again, popped up. That means that I've completed the shape, and then I can click again to make those marching ants appear. And then here we have the magnetic lasso tool, which is quite interesting. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here on Yoko, and you'll see if I grab my magnetic lasso tool, if I click once, and then I'm not clicking anymore, doing anything, I'm just lining Yoko's shoulder, it's trying to grab everything that's similar color, so it's grabbing all around her shoulder for me, which is quite nice whenever you're trying to cut someone out of a photo. Okay, so if I click again, it will make points for me. So I'm clicking, 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 and then I can click my way back to the beginning if I wanted to, and there are my marching ants again. Okay, I'm going to zoom out, click on this for 100%. Okay, so up next we have the quick selection tool. I won't go into this one too much, but it does kind of the same thing, although you just click on areas and it'll try to grab everything it associates in that chunk. As you can see, it's not doing such a good job. I tried to just grab Kevin's arm here and then Kevin's hand, but when I grabbed Kevin's hand, it kind of went up into the building. It's not the most intuitive, but this is kind of a cluttered photograph, so if I had a more simplistic photo, it might work a little bit better. Okay, up next we have the crop tool, and then a few other tools within that tool that are a little more advanced. So the crop tool is exactly what it says. I can crop the size of my canvas. So I could either click and drag with the crop tool to select that area to crop, or if I just by the default view, I could go down and I could select this area and pull it up, could select this corner, manipulate the corner, and then you can see my little guides that say width and height down there in the bottom left-hand corner. That helps me out. If I wanted to change my document to only be a certain amount of inches in height, then I could change it to those inches. Okay, down here we have the, let's see what it's technically called, the eyedropper tool. Okay, so we have this eyedropper tool, and this samples colors for us. I think if you've ever messed around with Paint or any other sort of computer graphics program, you're probably pretty familiar with the eyedropper tool. So if I wanted to sample the color of red from Yoko's hat, I could just click with the eyedropper tool, and you can see what happened there. As I'm moving and holding down my mouse while I'm clicking, it's grabbing those different colors and comparing them to the last color I selected. So I'm selecting this color, I let go with my mouse, and now you can see that my color is down here, and now I have that color selected. Alright, next up we have the spot healing brush tool. And within that one, we have a few others, including the patch tool, which is my favorite, which I will show you right now. All of these tools are really great for editing photos. So if you're removing blemishes from a photo, these are really great. If you're removing red eye from a photo, these are really great. And we'll dive more into these later on, but for now I'm going to show you this patch tool because I just love it so much. So let's zoom on in. So in this photograph, there's this little spot here. I think it might be a graphic that was in Yoko's shirt, but whenever you zoom all the way out, you can't quite tell what it is. It looks like it might be dirt or something. So if I zoom in and I want to get rid of it, I'm going to zoom way in so I can really look at it. I can take this patch tool here, select it. I'm going to just draw, click and drag and draw around it. Let go. I have my marching ants. Okay, so the tricky part here is that I hold this, click, drag until I find an area that's clean that I want it to look like, let go, and then press Command D, as in dog, which deselects the marching ants. And look, it's gone. Pretty great, right? Okay, so I'll go back to zoom 100%, and look, it's gone. Awesome. Okay, next tool is the paintbrush tool. I think we need to speed things along here, huh? So the paintbrush tool does exactly what you think it does. It paints, and it paints the color that I have selected, this red color from Yoko's hat. Simple. There are other kinds of paintbrush tools. The stamp tool, I'm not going to go into that stamp tool right now because it's not really that relevant for me, and you might like it, so do a little bit of exploring on your own later. The history brush tool, again, I'm not going to go into that one today, but it is very important. The eraser tool, it does exactly what you think it does as well. It erases. Okay. The gradient tool makes gradients. By default, it shows what the color I had selected is. That fades to white. If you click and drag, you can change the direction of the gradient, which is pretty nice. I'm going to go back in time a little bit here. I'll show you how to go back in time later. Okay, so now the next tool we have is the blur tool. There's also a sharpen tool and a smudge tool. The blur tool blurs out areas. You can see it's doing it very subtly, but it is blurring Kevin's arm. Pretty fun. The strength, if you go up here, how we have these tool settings, the strength is at 50%. I could change that to 100% and it would be much more strong for blurring out Kevin's face if Kevin wants to remain anonymous. Okay, going back in time. And then again, we have here a dodge tool and a burn tool. So dodge and burn are Photoshoppy terms for lighten and darken. So dodge means lighten, so I can literally lighten an area. See how Kevin's face is getting really bright? Ah. And then I can also burn Kevin's face and make it darker. So if I go to this burn tool, I can make Kevin's face darker. Okay, next up we have the pen tool. And this is a handy tool that we will definitely dive more into later. But it makes selections and it makes shapes. So I just made a selection, but if I wanted to make a shape, I would go up here to the tool options and select from path to shape. And look, now I'm making a shape. So I just made a weird abstract shape, which is really fun. We will definitely, again, go back into the pen tool. The next tool we have here is the type tool. So I can click and I can type something. It's pretty small, so if I go up here into the, if I go back up here into these tool selection styles and details, I can change my font here. I can change the size to something larger. And there we have that. I typed something. Okay, again, also with the type tool, we're definitely going to go more into that in a different lesson. Down here we have our direct selection and path selection tool. And then again, down here we have shapes. So I can make rectangles in the shapes tool. I can use the ellipse tool to make circles. I can use the polygon tool to make polygons. And I can make lines with the line tool. Lots and lots of shapes to be made here. Get out of there. Okay. Next up we have this, what is it called here? The hand tool. Okay, so the hand tool just moves your canvas around. And there's actually something I like to do a little bit more with the hand tool, and it's a shortcut. So say for instance I was on my move tool and I wanted to move my canvas around. If I use the move tool, it's just going to move whatever this photo I have selected is. But if I want to move the canvas around, I would literally, if I'm not on the hand tool, I'm on a different tool, I can just press space. And while I have space held down, I can then move the canvas around. And I use this all the time. It has become sort of a second nature gesture for me, which I really like doing. Again, you have to hold down space and then I can move around. Last but not least, we have the zoom tool, which zooms in and out. So if I zoom in, I just click. And if I want to zoom out, I can hold down Option, which is also the Alt key on Mac keyboards, and I can zoom out while I click that. And you'll see that little zoom icon there changes from a plus to a minus when I hold down Option and click. And again, you have options up here, and I can do 100%. So if I was zoomed in and I clicked 100%, it will move it back to where it's 100%. Fit to screen simply fits the entire thing into the size of your screen, no matter what size of screen you have. And then fill screen fills up your screen real nice. And then again, I can hold down spacebar and kind of move my canvas around with that hand tool. Okay, the last couple things in the toolbar are these color swatches. So clicking that defaults it to black and white. So this color on the front is your foreground color, and the color in the back is your background color. So if I have the foreground color is the one you really want to deal with the most often. So you can change your color here. Changed it to yellow, and then when I make a shape, it's going to be yellow because I have that selected as my foreground color. And then if I want to save yellow for later, but I want to use white for now, I could switch these to where now white is my foreground color, and that's going to be the color that I make shapes with or do anything with. But if I just want to have yellow at my disposal for later, I could always just keep it in the background and then swap it back and forth with these little arrows. Okay, that's everything you need to know with the toolbar. Again, we will be diving much deeper into some of these tools later on. But I just wanted you to be understanding of what all these tools do. I think it's definitely time for you to take a drink of water and pace around your home or apartment because that was quite a doozy. I will see you in the next tutorial. All right, it looks like we're just trucking along here. Okay. So next up is the windows. All right, so your windows again are the boxes here on your right-hand side of the Photoshop screen. So by default, and again, this should be the default, but if yours looks a little bit different, don't worry, it can be completely customized, and I'll try to help you get it back to the way that mine is. So I'm going to go over which of the default windows are already open for you, and then we'll go from there. So you'll find that you'll use specific windows all the time, and then you'll never use a lot of other windows. And these default windows aren't necessarily the ones that you will use most often. Photoshop has these presets for you, which I'll dive into more, called Workspace. And say you're a photographer, and maybe you'd want to check the photography workspace. So let's look at it. Okay, so it's a little bit different, and not too different. But if you want to go back to the default, you'd go Workspace, Default. And it has different tools selected and different windows selected. But again, let's just talk about the default windows and see what happens, and we'll go from there. And we will customize later. All right, so again, up here at the top, we have color and swatches. So these all have to do with color. We're going to have an entire color class later on, but for now, let's just talk about it a little bit. Again, as I mentioned, RGB goes along with designing for the web and designing for screens. If I was designing for print and I selected CMYK color whenever I first created my document, this would say CMYK here, but since I selected RGB, it says RGB. And RGB has values. So if I said, for instance, 342 by G of, 242 is what I meant, by 31 by 31, I would get this red color. And that's just a color I just made up randomly. But each color has a value, an RGB value. Also, each color has a CMYK value. Okay, so that's how that works. And then again, we have our color picker here, and I could just select a color based on these values. Or I can click here on this color. This is our foreground color, and I could select it this way. I actually prefer this view because it's a little bit larger and easier to see what I'm doing. But that's just me. That's my preference. And here again, you can see the RGB values here. The CMYK values are even here for our use, and that's all there is to know. So pressing OK gets us out of there, and now I have this new color selected. Going to swatches, these are all the default swatches in Photoshop. They're just trying to give you a wide range of swatches for your use right away. You can add swatches, you can delete swatches. We will definitely go into that in a later class. But for now, I just want you to know that it exists. So you can toggle between color and swatches. And if you prefer to select colors this way, you can literally just grab this purple color, and now you have that purple color selected. So if I make a square, you can see that it's purple. Okay, so here we have the next window is the adjustments and styles. We will work with adjustments and styles later on in another lesson. Adjustments simply just adjust your layers and make them look all sorts of crazy ways. From changing the hue and saturation, we could turn things black and white this way. We can make things brighter, darker, add more contrast. All sorts of things can be done in the adjustments window. Down below is the most important window that we will be using the most often, and this is your layers window. Okay, so your layers are everything in Photoshop. We will be extensively covering layers. They are so important. They just change the way you work. They are my life. I dream about them at night. I wake up thinking about layers. And they're just such an amazing thing in Photoshop that you definitely will need to know about. So this is your layers window. It is exceptionally important. It has a lot of doodads inside of it, a lot of things that it does. You won't need to know them all. I don't know them all, and I'm a Photoshop expert. You won't need to know them all. I don't need to know them all. You can pick and choose your battles, decide what you need to know, decide what you don't. I will show you the things that I use the most often with layers. Again, as I just showed you, each of the windows have this little menu here in which there are so many more options. So if I click here on color, look at all of these color presets. So if you're into Pantone colors, which is designing for print mostly, you can see Pantone presets here. You can load swatches. You can reset your swatches back to the default state, which is what we were at anyway. And then also, the thing to know about windows is that you can pull them out from one another and you can move them around. So I could pull this layer out, I could pull the layers window out, and then I can rearrange them. So I could put the layers window at the top if I wanted to. I could move this one down and put it onto the bottom, and so on. If I don't want a layer, I can simply put it out here and then press the X. Okay? So that properties window that I just exited out of, that is the window that I never use, and I don't care for it. It is up to you if you want to dive into it and figure it out. I'm not going to teach it to you because it's not my thing, but, again, up to you. So this layer here, sorry, I moved everything. I can reset this back to the default. So if I go to up here, remember how I showed you window, workspace, and then essentials? Okay, so you also have them here. It's so handy that it's right here. So I'm going to do reset essentials, and it's putting everything back to the way it was. Because I don't actually want it rearranged like I had it. That's no fun. Okay, so let's go up here to history. This window is pretty darn important for me. I love the history window because it allows us to go back in time. I'll show you more on this later, but if you see when I click back, I'm literally going back in time to the last lesson that we were on before, and so clicking up here also goes all the way back to the beginning of what we were doing. And it's just so great, this history window. I love it so much. let's get rid of it for now. Again, so if we're clicking on a window up here, you'll notice that we have so many other windows that we're looking at, and it's just so great to click these. And the ones that we don't want, we can click them again and deselect them. Again, we definitely want the layers window. That's crazy. So let's click that again to select it again. And so you can decide which of these windows you do and don't like. And at any time you want to reset your windows back to the default, again, you go Window, Workspace, Reset. And also you can do that up here in this drop down too, which is even better, more convenient. Okay, so that's it for Windows. See you on the next lesson. All right, now let's talk about layers. You definitely know my enthusiasm for layers, so I'm glad I get to finally share it with you. Okay, so let's look over here on our right-hand side. We have our layers window, and it does all kinds of crazy stuff, but let's just cover the basics for now. We'll dive into more detail later. Okay, so creating a new layer, everything we need to know is kind of down here at the very bottom. So our new layer button is down here next to the trash can. So in order to create a new layer, we'll just click that, and we have our new layer here. It just defaults to a title of layer 1. So I'm going to put a simple shape in this layer, and I'm going to make a perfect square. And now to make a perfect square, I need to have this rectangle tool selected over here. And then in order to make a perfect square or perfect circle, if we have the ellipse tool selected, we would hold down Shift while we click and drag, and that makes a perfect square. It's beautiful. Okay, so here's my perfect square. I let go, and now we have our properties window, which I don't like. It's pretty simple. It lets us change the height and width of our square right here. So I could do 100 by 100 and change the size of my square if I wanted to. I could change the color here. I just don't like the properties window because it's always popping up and getting in my way. But you'll find that it does a lot of interesting things. So here we have my square in my new layer, and this is called rectangle 1 now because I have a rectangle in it. If I wanted to, I could double click on rectangle 1 and rename it to purple square. Okay, so I've renamed it to purple square. And now I still have Kevin and Yoko in this layer underneath. And I clicked on the eyeball here. Clicking on the eyeball hides and shows my layer, which is pretty neat, and it comes in handy quite often. So Kevin and Yoko has been hidden. It's not visible right now because the eyeball is not selected, so I'm going to click there to show Kevin and Yoko. And you can see my purple square layer is highlighted here, which means that it's the one that I'm moving around with my move tool. So if I wanted to move Kevin and Yoko, unfortunately, it's not as simple as just clicking on Kevin and Yoko. Because I still have this purple square layer selected. Rather, I would have to go into layers and click on the Kevin and Yoko layer to make sure it's selected. And then with my move tool, I can move Kevin and Yoko's photo around. And if I wanted to go back to the square, I would just click over on the layers window, purple square, then I can move the purple square around. You'll notice here I have this default background layer that pops up immediately that is standard on all Photoshop documents. It has a little lock symbol, which means if I select it and click and drag around, I can't actually move it because it is locked. So I get this warning notification just saying, you can't use that move tool because there's a lock on this layer. In order to remove the lock, if you ever wanted to, you just take the lock and you click and drag and then throw it away in that trash can, and that removes the lock. And then this layer is now up for grabs, so I can just move it around if I want to. I don't want to do that though. I'd rather just lock it. So if I want to lock it again, when I have this layer selected, I can go up here and just click on this lock. There, and now it's locked. So we have our locked layer, and we have Kevin and Yoko's layer, and then we have our purple square. Okay, so if you need to copy a layer, for instance, say we wanted 2 purple squares, there are 2 things we can do. We can either grab our purple square layer here, drag it down, and drop it in the new layer button area, which creates a copy. So now we have 2 purple squares. So if I select this purple square copy and move it over, you'll notice we have 2 of them. Or I could delete this copy, and I can do it a different way. So if I have the purple square layer selected, I could take my option tool, or option button, and hold it down, and then click and drag this purple square, and it's bringing over a new one. And again, purple square copy. So there are 2 ways you can do it. It's really up to you which one you prefer. I do it pretty much usually the latter of the 2 methods. But again, everything's all personal opinion in Photoshop. And you'll notice sometimes that I will be definitely doing things that you might find a shortcut for or a different way to do it. And that's absolutely fine. Everybody uses Photoshop differently, and there are so many ways to accomplish everything you want to do. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about forming groups and putting things into groups and folders. So they're technically called groups in Photoshop, but if you look down here, third from the right, we have our group button, which is just like creating a new folder or creating a new group is what it's called. So if I click that, I have this little folder icon here where it says group 1. If I name this, I could just name this folder, exclamation mark. Why not? It's exciting. Okay, so now I can drag things and drop them into the folder, and now they're grouped. So if I have a lot of things that are associated with one another, I could put them in a folder together. It just keeps our layers a little bit more organized. So if I click this arrow here, it minimizes that and kind of tucks all them inside of the folder. And then again, you can rearrange things in whatever order you'd like if we had a bunch of folders or a ton of layers. So if I expand them and then minimize them, you can see what happens there. If I put things in a folder and I want to click this eyeball, I can hide that folder so we can't see it. I could also show the folder, lock the folder, unlock the folder, do all kinds of stuff here, and it's quite nice. One last thing I want to tell you is changing the color of the layers. If you are a color coding kind of person, you like to keep things nice and organized, which I definitely do, especially when you have a lot of things. Say all purple squares throughout my design, I want to make sure that I can see them. So I'm going to right click by either holding down Control and clicking on the eyeball, or just right clicking the old fashioned way with my mouse, and I can see these color options here. I'm going to select purple because it is the closest color to this purple square that I wanted to mark. And you can see here that it just gives it a little color, and this is completely optional. You know, this is just a little tip that I have to recommend to keep things clean and decluttered. But you can see here that we now know how to colorize. We now know how to lock layers. I can throw away a layer by clicking it, dragging it to this trash can, and letting it go. I'll just delete this one too, and then delete this folder. And we also just know how to create new layers, copy layers, put layers into groups and folders, and remove locks and apply locks. So that's all there is to know for beginners layer information. We'll dive deeper into some of these things later. When it comes to saving file types in Photoshop, there are a few things that you need to know. The traditional Photoshop file type is called a .psd document, and that just stands for Photoshop document. Okay, so let's go to File, Save As, and that's how we save most things in Photoshop. Okay, so again, it has pre-filled in my title of my document, which I titled whatever we want. So you can change that if you want to, again, to whatever you want. And then we need to decide where we want to save it. So I'm going to save it to my desktop for now. And then format is what we're talking about here. So we have two file types or maybe even three file types that I often save to. But look how many there are. There are so many types of files. And really, you don't need to know most of these. They're kind of crazy and very specific. Again, I don't use most of them. I don't even know what half of them are. So it's up to you to explore and figure out which ones you like. Okay, so for instance, Photoshop is the default. And that's going to save your file as a .psd. You can see that right up there. So the other two that I like to save to are JPEG, which is just a flat image. And the nice thing about that is that if you save a JPEG, anyone who doesn't have Photoshop can open that up and take a look at it, which is great. But the problem is that you definitely want to make sure that you save a Photoshop type of document at least once, because otherwise you can't open it back up in Photoshop and edit again. So if you save it as a Photoshop document, Photoshop format, you'll be able to open it back up in Photoshop and look at all your layers, edit it all you want, and you won't lose any of that. But if you don't do this at all and you just go straight for a JPEG, you're going to not be able to update that ever again in Photoshop, and it's going to be a real pain. So I like to first of all save it as a Photoshop file first, and then save it again as a JPEG. The third file type that I like to save is a PDF. You're probably all familiar with PDF files. They're really great, and they usually look very clean and crisp. And again, most people can open and take a look at PDF files, and they're quite nice. So those are the three file types that I like to save to: TIFF, PNG. Those are also different image types that anybody can take a look at and see, and those are all great too. But I would highly recommend saving as a Photoshop file first, and then going in and saving as a JPEG or a PDF. So let's go to JPEG, and then we can press save, and you can see here that we have some options with saving as JPEGs. You can make it the quality, you can turn it up to really maximum and have it be really great quality. You can see it's 65.9 in file size. Or we can go and scroll it down to small file. You can see it went all the way down to 30. So, you know, Photoshop files can get quite big. There's nothing in this file. You know, I don't have any layers besides the background. So the file type is very small. Once you start getting into megabytes or even gigabytes, it's huge. But right now we're just on case, so it's not a big deal. This isn't a very big file size, so I would go ahead and save it as maximum. And it's up to you to kind of play with this a little bit. As long as you have your Photoshop file saved, you can keep opening it back up and saving JPEGs at all different kind of sizes and see which one looks best for you. Okay, so that's Photoshop files types. Next lesson, please. Alright, let's talk a little bit about image size versus canvas size and when to adjust both. They are very similar, but they both do different things, and it's a little bit tricky to remember which does which, but I will try to clarify that for you a little bit. Let's go here to image, and you can see here's where image size is and canvas size. They're right by each other. For example, let's talk about this photo that I have opened here. So I just opened up this photo of my friend. So say I want to add a little bit of white space onto either side. Let's just say the left side. So I want to add some white space because I want to add some text over here by Nick and Sheila. The difference between the image size and the canvas size is that if I select image size, it's going to actually adjust the size of the image and the canvas. If I do the canvas size, it doesn't adjust the size of the image, it just adjusts the size of the canvas. I'll show you what this means a little bit. Okay, so if I go to image size and I want to make it wider so I can fit some text in besides the image, I would change 750 to maybe, let's say 1,000 pixels wide. Okay, so you can see that the proportions width and height, it was 750. When I typed in 1,000, the height proportion changed to match, which is really nice. So that means that it's not going to warp my photo any. But whenever I press OK, look, it made it larger, but it made my image larger. It didn't necessarily just make my canvas larger. You can see that the canvas itself is actually larger as well, but I wanted that white space next to the image so that I could add text. So whenever you do image size, as I mentioned before, it resizes both the image and the canvas. So let me just press Command Z to go back in time. That means undo, Command Z. So I went back in time, and let's do image canvas size this time. So this looks a little bit different. So you can see it says canvas size, and this is just simply just adjusting the size of my canvas. So it's on inches, which I don't want. Let's put that on pixels because we're designing in pixels still. And then let's just go to 1,000 pixels wide again. And you can see here the proportions did not change as they did was when I was changing my image size. Which is okay because that doesn't really matter when you're dealing with canvas size as much as it does with image size. Because when the proportions are intact on image size, it keeps the image from looking stretched out. But on canvas size, things aren't going to ever look stretched out because we're just resizing the canvas and nothing on it, which is great. Okay, so let's see what happens when I press OK for width of 1,000 here. Oh, right, so this is perfect. So we have white space on both sides of the image, and it didn't resize the image. That's amazing. But I did want the white space on the left-hand side only, and we have it both on the left and right-hand side. So let's press Command Z and go back in time again, and let's see if we can't get the white space on the left-hand side. Again, let's go to image canvas size. Go back to 1,000 width, and now we're going to press the arrow so that if we press the right hand arrow, you see all the arrows are pointing to the left, which is what we want because we want the white space to go on the left hand side. So I press that arrow and now I'll press OK, and you can see that the white space is just on the left hand side now. And that is the primary difference between changing your canvas size and changing your image size. So What happens to me a lot is I'll want white space down below if I'm creating a web design and it seems to be getting longer and longer than I thought it was going to get from the beginning. I just need to add more on the bottom. So in order to do that, the easiest way is to, again, to go to canvas size, make the canvas taller. So if we did double the height and did 1,000 pixels tall, then I would click this arrow up here so that everything's pointing downwards. This means that it's going to grow downwards. And then press OK. Then we have a bunch of additional white space down there on our canvas and plenty of more room to design. All right, that's it for this lesson. Let's go to the next one. Let's just touch briefly on the zoom tool. I know I've kind of went over this just a little bit already, but let's just dive a little bit deeper. So we have the zoom tool is the shortcut of Z, obviously for zoom, Z. Also, you can click down here to access the zoom tool. Clicking in zooms in, holding down Option or Alt zooms out, and then also there's this nice feature of clicking and dragging up and down, which zooms in and out. I'll let you practice that on your own because it's a little hard to get the hang of. But so you click and then drag down, zooming in, dragging back up, clicking and dragging up, zooms out. Pretty fun. Okay, as we've mentioned before, if you do 100%, it makes it fill up nicely in your window and shows it at 100%. This works nicely for the shape of document that I have, but if you get into that really large, like iPad size, for instance, it's going to be pretty big, but it's nice to view things at 100%. I typically design only at 100%, and clicking the 100% button makes sure that it is 100% in size. Fit screen makes it fit in your screen, and then fill screen makes it fill up really big into your screen, which will, if you add an image, make it look pixelated, but you can just zoom right out by pressing Option and then clicking. So that's zooming out. Scrubby zoom, this thing up here, that's a pretty funny term. That is the term for the thing that is clicking and dragging to zoom in and out. Now, if you turn that off, it does this also a very interesting thing where you can click and drag and it will make this little box and it will zoom into where you made that box. So again, you can zoom out, go 100%, and then if I click and drag, it's going to make that box and it'll zoom right into that box. I actually like and prefer turning scrubby zoom off because I like that little box. I like knowing exactly where I can zoom right into. Once you get some elements on your page, it's really helpful to do that. But that's it for Zoom. That should be all you need to know. Please, though, if you have any additional questions on Zoom, go right into the question and answer feed discussion and ask away. Thanks. I can't believe it, but we're on our very last tutorial lesson before we work on the project together. So this lesson is about naming files, and this is sort of a boring thing, but it's extremely important. So I will tell you a little bit about how I name files, and it's up to you as to how you like to name your own files, but I'll give you a few tips on what I like to do. So when I'm naming a file, it's really important to me that I can find it again later. And in order to do that, I like to use dates a lot. So I deal with a lot of files in my work, in my day-to-day life, and a lot of the files are the same, but have little tiny updates every day, and I like to save them every day just so that I can go back in time if I need to and go back to an older file. So say I was saving this file in real life, so I'll go to Save As. I'm going to save it as a PDF file, or PSD file for Photoshop file. So I want to be very descriptive of what it is, and then I want to put the date. So I like to put what it is followed by the date. So rather than saying whatever we want, I don't know if I'll remember that I said that tomorrow. So I'll be very descriptive. So I'll say Photoshop class tutorial, and then I'll give it an underscore always, and then I follow by the date. Today's date is 02/23/2014. Okay, so this is today's date, and I always put that after the very descriptive title. And that's usually how I title things. So the date is nice because you can search by the date in the future, and that's really helpful. So if you didn't know what you named a file, but you knew what date you made it on, you can easily search by the date. Or even if you just knew the week or month, it's at least easier to find it that way. That's the quick and dirty tips for how I name files. There are obviously plenty of ways that you can name files. I'll make sure that I upload some resources for you with this lesson that says some other people's tips on naming files, because we all have our own opinion. But this is exactly like how I like to do it, because they're easy to find in the future, and that's all that matters to me. Okay, so let's move on to working on the project together. Okay, so let's make our project together. I'm going to kind of walk through how I would do this, and then you're welcome to run free on your own and do your own thing. So the project for this class is to make a geometric collage using shapes and layers. So we're going to put some layers on top of one another, put shapes on top of one another, and see what happens, and kind of create nice colorful compositions. Okay, so I'm going to create a new document, and I'm just going to make it, let's do 800 by 800 pixels. And now you can make yours any size you want. I recommend 800 by 800, maybe 1,000 by 1,000, or 1,200 by 1,200 pixels. But you definitely want to do pixels, and you definitely want to do 72 as your resolution, 72 pixels per inch in RGB. Again, we're just designing for looking at screens. So we just want to do pixels, 72 pixels per inch, and then also RGB, because we're designing for screens. Okay, so I'm going to name this Final Project and press OK. Alright, so I'm going to press F to bring this to full screen. Okay, so it's full screen now, and it's not quite 100%, I don't think. So let's bring my zoom tool up and do fit screen, and now it's 100%. Okay, so first of all, I want to put a background that isn't quite white. So let's pick our color first. So I'm going to go over here to color. I'm going to click on this foreground color, which brings up our color picker. And I'm just going to pick a color that I like best. So let's go for, how about like a nice corally color perhaps? So to get coral, I want to go in between orange and red. And I'll just select, how about this color? So I'll press OK. So now I have this color selected. You can see it in my foreground over here, and then also in my foreground over here in the color palette, the color window. Okay, so to create a new layer that is completely filled with this coral color, we would go down here to this, what I call the black and white cookie, because it really just looks like a black and white cookie. It is adding a new fill or adjustment layer. So I'm going to click on that and then go up here to solid color, because we just want to add a solid color. So I go solid color, and there's my coral already selected for me. I'm going to press OK. So you can see here I have my layer. I'll turn it off and on. It's called Color Fill 1. I'm just going to rename it Coral. Okay? So we just have our locked background layer and our coral layer. So it's time to make some shapes. So first of all, I'm going to make my first shape, and I want to first create a new layer. So again, this button down here, create a new layer. Here's my new layer, layer 1, and then I'm going to go over and select my shape. So let's start off with just a perfect square. So I'll select the rectangle tool. And remember what I told you before to make a perfect square is that you hold down Shift while you click and drag. And then there's my shape. Okay, I can't quite see it because it's coral. So in order to change the color, I can do two things. I can either, in my properties window here, I can change the color by clicking there. Or my favorite method is to minimize that properties window and then come over here. And in this box here, you can double click this box and it brings up the color picker. It's pretty handy. So I'm going to make this white. So I'm just going to drag this over to white and press OK. So then I'm going to either press this Move Tool button, or I'm going to do my shortcut of V, and then I can select and move this around, move it to where I want, and then I'm going to go over and rename my layer White Square. Okay, so now I have coral layer, white square layer. Let's make another shape. Okay, new layer. Let's make a triangle this time. So in order to get to the triangle, I need to click and hold on this rectangle tool, and I need to find that polygon tool. So I'll select the polygon tool. You'll notice if I make a shape, it's going to be this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-sided polygon, which is not what I want. I wanted a triangle. So I'm going to do Command Z to go back in time. And up here on these options, there it says size, and it's on 5 sides, which is a polygon. I want it to just be 3 sides as a triangle, so I'm going to change this to 3. So when I'm creating a triangle, if I want to create a perfect triangle, same goes as the square. So I'll hold down Shift, and then I'll create my triangle, and you'll see it kind of snaps to these different dimensions. I just want it to be like this. So, oh, that's too big. So I'm going to make my triangle about this size, and then I'm going to let go. and then hold down space to move my canvas around. And you can see my triangle is coral again, which I don't want. I'm moving it around, but I can't quite see it because it's the same color as my background. So I'm going to double click in here again, bring up the color picker. I'm going to pick just a darker coral shade. How about that one? So you can see here the shade that you originally had versus the new shade, which is really helpful to kind of compare things. So there's my new coral triangle, so I can drag this around and place it on top of the square if I want, or I could move the layer under the square layer by dragging and dropping, and now my triangle is behind my square, which is pretty cool. Okay, so let's make a circle now. So let's do new layer, and then we'll click and hold on this polygon tool, and we'll bring up the ellipse tool. And same goes. If I click and drag, it's going to make an oval of any shape and size. I could either do an oval and let go, or press Command Z because I want to go back because I want to make a perfect circle. I think you probably know what I need to do to make that perfect circle, which is press, again, Shift while I'm clicking and dragging. Okay, so here's my circle. About yay big. Again, it's coral. So I'm going to double click here, which brings up that color picker, and I'm going to pick, which color should I do this time? How about like a dark gray? Maybe like that. Perfect. Okay, so it looks to me like the dark gray is kind of dominating, so I'm going to stuff it behind everything else and drag this dark gray layer behind. And you can see I have two unnamed layers, which I really don't like because as you get more and more layers, it's hard to find things. So I'm going to rename these layers dark coral, coral triangle, and then also dark gray circle. Perfect. Okay, so let's just quickly make some more shapes. I'm going to do this fast since we've already been through the others pretty slowly. There's a long skinny rectangle. Again, so if I double click this, if you notice when I move my mouse out onto the canvas, it has the color picker. So I could just sample white or sample this dark gray color or sample the dark coral, which is exceptionally helpful. Okay, so I'm going to move that to the back and kind of rearrange it here. Okay, name this white bar. And then new layer. Let's make another tiny little circle. Pick the ellipse tool. Hold down Shift. Perfect. Okay, so here's my circle. Let's double click to bring up the color picker. Let's make this one also dark coral. Okay, and as you see, we can't really see the circle because it's stuck underneath these other layers. So I just need to drag this layer up above those layers, and now it's on top. So let's bring up our move tool by pressing V if we don't have it already, and there it is. We just can't see it because it's the same color as that other triangle. Okay, so I kind of like it right here. That's interesting. Okay, so I'll do small dark coral circle. Okay, so I think I need something here and then something maybe over here. Okay, so let's do another square. New layer. Let's get our rectangle tool, holding down Shift, make a perfect square. Let's make it about this size this time. And then let's make this one, let's go white again. And then I'll put it back behind the circle and title this white square. Oh, but we already have two white squares, so before that I'll put large because it's a little larger than the other one. Okay, last but not least, I need something right here, and I think it needs to be dark gray again. Let's do a more complicated shape. Let's go to Polygon tool. Let's give it 8 sides. Let's make it an octagon. Okay, so here we go. Dragging. And this looks okay to me. So as you can see, I have a coral octagon. I'm going to change the color to dark gray and rename it dark gray octagon. Okay, so the last thing I would like to do is to resize this octagon because now I'm thinking it looks a little too large. Alright, so in order to do that, I need to make sure that the octagon layer is visible and selected. I'm going to bring it up to the top just so that it's on top of everything and I can see it a little bit better. So to resize it and make it a little bit smaller or larger, I just need to press Command T while the layer is already selected. And it brings up this bounding transform box here. And you can see if I pull on any of these corners, I can reshape it and resize it. The only thing I don't like about this is that it's not really keeping those perfect octagon ratios. It's kind of weird warping shape. So I'm going to press Command Z and go back in time to where it was perfect. And then I'm going to resize, again, keeping the proportions right by holding down Shift. And as you can see, I'm resizing, and it's really not warping anything, which is really nice. So I'm going to make it about this size here, which is perfect. So to save this, I can either double click in here or I can press Enter. Great. Now I can move this around. I like it on top. I think it looks nice. Okay, so I'm going to keep it there. That looks great. Okay, so last but not least, I'd like to resize everything just to give it a little bit more white space around my canvas. So in order to do that, I need to have all of these layers except for the coral layer selected. And in order to do that, I need to have either the top or the bottom layer selected, and then go all the way down, hold down Shift, and then click at the bottom. So that selects everything except for the coral layer. Again, if I wanted to start at the bottom, that's fine too. So I hold down Shift and then click at the top, and they're all selected. So now you can see I can move them all around. Let's get out of there. So I can move them all around, which is really nice. And then I can also resize them. So when they're all selected, I can do Command T to transform, and then again hold down Shift while I drag. And look, they're all getting smaller and larger, and I can make them real big or really small, whatever I want. So I'm going to do maybe about this. Looks perfect. Maybe a little larger. Yeah. So again, double click or press Enter. I double clicked, and now I can move this around, which is nice. So let's find the visual center, which appears to be, let's say, about right here. And now it's in the center. So we have this nice abstract geometric shape collage here with colors. And I'm really excited to see what you all do. There's so many different colors. You can do all sorts of shapes and sizes of shapes and different kinds of polygons, which will be really nice. Different sides on your polygons, for instance. I hope you guys get really creative and do some fun things, because I really can't wait to see them. I will absolutely be taking a look at everybody's projects and tracking your progress along the way. If you have questions, please post them in the class Q&A discussion feed, and I'll try to take a look at those. If I can't make it to your questions, please answer your classmates' questions if you know the answer. Help each other out. It's very, very, very helpful to have such a fostering environment inside of Skillshare. And so if you guys give each other feedback on your projects and try to address each other's questions, this is just going to become a better experience for everybody. And again, I will keep an eye on everything and try to pop in every now and again, because I really, really love seeing what you guys do, and I can't wait to see your final projects. Okay guys, so this is the end of Photoshop 1. It's on to Photoshop 2. Thank you all. Bye.